Okay, the fourth principle that we're going to look at that drives growth is actually a strange one. It's called distribution channels. And the reason why it's in there is because no matter how good your product is, no matter how compelling the need is, no matter how well you've identified your customers, you've actually got to get to the customer. And whilst that might seem strange, I want you to ask yourself, if you were in consumer packaged goods and you went to the two large supermarkets and you said, I want to put my product on your shelf, what sort of reaction you would get? And generally the action is, well, actually, we own the shelf space and we own, 80% plus of the consumer packaged goods market, and actually we decide whether you get to go in front of those consumers or not. And so access to customers through distribution channels is actually a fundamental constraint or an inhibitor to you achieving your growth objectives. So we look at now the way in which we get to customers. Are we using a direct sales approach? Are we using internet marketing? Are we using agents or distributors? Are we going through procurement service or wholesale distribution service? Are we going through retail, or are we using any combination of these? So we might ask ourselves the question, where we are now and where we want to be, what is the change in the volume? How many consumers or customers do we need to connect to? What sort of volume do we need to put through that outbound part of our supply chain? And therefore, what channels do we have available to us, and whether those channels will in fact get us the numbers that we want to get to. Now, each of those channels obviously has certain types of characteristics. If you were in low value, high volume products, it's certainly almost the case that you would not be using direct sales with salesmen connecting to customers. But you might be using an internet Web 2.0 marketing campaign. You would certainly almost certainly be using some form of distribution network, often using distributors and large and small customer account managers. But if you're using, if you're in the high value branded luxury product, it's almost certain you won't go through any high volume distribution channels. You won't be using supermarkets. You may well, however, be using dedicated boutique outlets. You may be using direct sales, although it's hardly likely that you'll be having the sort of classic account manager corporate product sales. So there is some characteristics of product, price, branding characteristics with form of distribution channel. But given that, there's almost certainly the case that more than one distribution channel may be possible. And that's really what we want to look at. So knowing that you need to connect to customers in a certain way, then doing an evaluation of each of these channels is appropriate. More particularly, this is the place for strategic partners. So we not only ask, how do we connect to customers, but we ask, how do other corporations connect to the same customers, and whether in fact we can benefit from some form of joint venture, some form of agency, some form of strategic partners. Give you an example. When I was a young entrepreneur, where knew nothing, made lots of mistakes, but one of the smart things I did when I was a new startup was we were in application software. Our application software sat on computer hardware. For the computer hardware salesman to sell his computer hardware, he needed to solve a problem. The problem was always solved in the combination of the software and the hardware. So he needed software partners to be able to deliver a solution to a customer. So what we had was lots of computer hardware salesmen running around the country with a bag full of brochures, talking to prospects, trying to identify their problem, and then matching the software solution to the customer's problem, and then bringing the prospect to us. So whilst we had a couple of salesmen, they had 20. So effectively, we had a sales force of 22. When I went to the United States and I was working with Digital Equipment Corporation, they had several thousand salesmen across the country, and we had half a dozen. So now half a dozen salesmen spend most of their time supporting the 2,000 salesmen that are actually in the field connecting to prospects. So that's a classic example of understanding who's connecting to your customer and how you can benefit from a strategic partnership. So the type of questions you might ask. Firstly, obviously, where does your customer buy? And how do they buy? And what type of information do they need to buy? And where are they going to get that information from? Now, if the information can be delivered through an advertisement, through a brochure, through the internet, there's little need for a face-to-face contact. But many products need explanation, and many products need customisation. And so therefore, trained and knowledgeable salesmen are an essential part of the product customer interface. But you have to evaluate that. Once you've evaluated that, you will exclude or you'll include certain types of distribution channels, and then you can figure out, okay, which of these channels work for us, or which ones can we use to support other activities. So you can use Web 2.0 marketing, for example, to drive leads, which you'll give to salesmen, which will then connect to customers. But you need to look at all of these different channels. If you're using distributors and agents, you need to understand that they have their own agendas. They have their own motivation, they have their own objectives, they have their own targets. They are not necessarily the same as yours. And so in designing a distributor agent type distribution channel, you've got to be very careful to design the rewards, the outcomes, the support, the risk sharing elements so that you're in sync. And if you get that wrong, what will happen is they will simply exploit you to do what they want to do, and you could end up spending a lot of money, not selling a lot, but enhancing their position at the expense of yours. You've also got to be very careful when you do internet marketing and direct sales marketing, whether it's retail or distributor or wholesale, that if you're selling direct to a customer and another channel is trying to sell to the same customer, that they may exploit one channel at the expense of the other. So consumers are very good at going into stores, evaluating products, getting their hands on, talking to the salesman, going home, jumping on the internet and going find the least price. Okay, so that's classic channel conflict, and you've got to figure out, how do I manage channel conflict? A lot of websites you'll go to that sell retail, you'll find that all you can get off their site is where's the nearest store. They don't try to compete with their own store outlets. It's very hard to motivate a salesman or a sales manager or a store manager to achieve targets when you're undermining them and sending business off. You're using up their time and resources, but you're sending the sale off to another channel. So these are the sort of things that we need to talk about. Okay, let's talk about actions. Well, the action is certainly talk to the customer. Talk to the customer. What do they buy? Where do they buy? How do they buy? How do they evaluate? What information do they need? Where do they get the information? How do they find the product? Where do they buy the product? And then obviously, how do they use the product? And how do they reflect on that use? And how do we tap into that information? There's a classic line between recognising need and after-sales experience and reflection. And quite often, we have problems in different elements along this line. So, for example, I've recognised a need. Where do I go to look for solutions? And if you've done some Google searching, you know that Google is not necessarily great at actually finding a product or service to satisfy a particular need, particularly if it's not bog standard. So, for example, if you're looking for accessories for a particular product, often it's exceptionally hard to actually track them down. So there is a problem with search and a problem with information. If I have questions about the product or service, how do I get those answered? Are they available through the website? Is there a help desk available? Is there someone I can talk to? Is there a knowledgeable salesman? If I get frustrated in my ability to get questions answered, I will simply either defer the decision or I'll go somewhere else where I get a better reception. If I've identified the product, how easy is the product to actually go and get? or how easy is the product to get delivered to me? Once I've got the product, how easy is it to assemble or to use or to learn or to apply? And once I've done that, how easy is it to get the product maintained, enhanced with accessories or additional lessons or upgrades and so on? Then how easy is the product to dispose of? So these are elements along the purchase process or purchase experience where we tend to put effort into one element but neglect the other element. By going and talking to the customer and reflecting on all of these elements of the purchase experience, you will find holes in your own process where you can add considerably to the customer's experience, and it's worth doing.